Leonardo da Vinci is famous for having been one of the most creative people who ever lived. He is best known as the painter of masterpieces like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. However, Leonardo was not only a great artist. He was also an accomplished architect, engineer, scientist, and inventor. In addition to his paintings, he left behind many notebooks filled with detailed illustrations and notes he made throughout his life. They cover subjects as varied as geology, anatomy, aerodynamics, and architecture. It is truly amazing to see the diversity and brilliance of this man's talents. Leonardo lived during the Renaissance, a period when the arts and sciences flourished in Europe. He was born on April 15, 1452, in a small town near Florence in Italy. His parents were not married at the time of his birth. Leonardo was first raised by his mother, but at the age of 5, he went to live with his father's wealthy family. Among his many interests as a young boy, he especially loved nature and showed a talent for drawing. It is said that he spent much of his childhood exploring the woods and streams around his home, making sketches of animals and plants. When he was a teenager, Leonardo moved with his family to Florence, a major intellectual and cultural center. Impressed by his son's exceptional artistic talent, Leonardo's father decided that he should study under a master. Leonardo was apprenticed to the city's most successful sculptor and painter, Andrea del Verrocchio. He proceeded to learn the basic skills required of an artist, such as drawing, painting, and sculpting. Verrocchio's commissions ranged widely from large projects like church paintings and commemorative statues to smaller items like furniture and musical instruments. As an apprentice in such a busy workshop, Leonardo had the opportunity to learn metalwork, plaster casting, mechanics, and other useful skills. At the age of 20, Leonardo was accepted into the Painters Guild of Florence. Although this meant that he could now work as a painter in his own right, he chose to remain in Verrocchio's workshop as an assistant for another 5 years. During this period, from 1472 to 1477, Leonardo is thought to have contributed to several paintings that were officially attributed to Verrocchio. In fact, it was quite common for a Renaissance master to make the overall plan and sketches for a major commission and leave the details to others. He would then add the finishing touches, sign it, and receive all the recognition for the work. What is remarkable, however, is that Leonardo's contributions show that he was already developing his own distinct style, rather than attempting to copy that of his master. One legend about these two artists has been handed down to us by Giorgio Vasari, a 16th-century Italian painter and architect. In his famous book on the lives of Renaissance artists, Vasari claimed that Leonardo was responsible for one of the angels in a painting by Verrocchio called The Baptism of Christ. Upon seeing this exquisite angel, the master was apparently so upset that he put down his paintbrush and never painted again. Although Vasari may have exaggerated a little, this work certainly appears to show signs of Leonardo's involvement. The angel and some of the background stand out from the rest of this painting, being the only parts for which oil paints were used instead of the traditional medium of tempera. It is known that Leonardo had been teaching himself how to paint in oils, a medium that had just been introduced to Italy from Northern Europe. Oils allow a more subtle use of color than tempera and create a softer effect. The angel in question has flowing hair and a sweet, delicate expression, similar to later angels painted by Leonardo. Furthermore, recent studies have revealed that Verrocchio's original sketch underneath it was completely different. The first large painting commission of Leonardo's career was the Adoration of the Magi for the monastery of San Donato a Scopeto. Since he moved to Milan soon afterward, the painting was never finished. Nevertheless, it is considered to be a highly innovative work of religious art. The Virgin and Child are positioned in the center of the painting, surrounded by different kinds of people whose emotions are portrayed through a variety of poses, gestures, and expressions. Pictured far over to the right is a young shepherd boy that may be a self-portrait, as artists of that period often included themselves somewhere in their works. The Adoration of the Magi is also known as a pioneering example of a painting technique that uses highlights and shadows to achieve a sense of volume in three-dimensional objects. It has been said that Leonardo helped bring this technique to its full potential. The unfinished painting is now displayed in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. For various reasons, Leonardo became dissatisfied with life in Florence and decided to seek employment elsewhere. In order to work on large projects, artists in the 15th century needed the support of rich, powerful patrons. Leonardo sought the patronage of Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. Knowing that Ludovico was concerned about the defense of his city, Leonardo wrote him a letter in which he emphasized his talents as an engineer, capable of designing ingenious weapons, vehicles, and machines for military purposes. He added that, in times of peace, he could execute commissions as a painter, sculptor, and architect. Shortly afterward, he successfully entered the service of the Duke and set up a workshop with apprentices of his own. Over the next 17 years in Milan, Leonardo was engaged to work on many projects, not all of which were military projects. For example, he decorated some rooms in the Duke's palace, and even devised a system for supplying and heating the water for the Duchess's bath. One of Leonardo's most challenging projects was the creation of a grand monument to commemorate Ludovico's father. After working on it for over a decade, he finally completed an impressive clay model of a rider on a horse. It is believed to have stood more than 7 meters high. A great deal of bronze was required to cast the statue according to his plan. In the end, however, the statue was not built because the Duke decided to use the bronze to make weapons. Since the clay model was destroyed by the French after their invasion of Milan, the only evidence left of this legendary sculptural project today is an assortment of sketches in Leonardo's notebooks. One of Leonardo's painting commissions in Milan was the Virgin of the Rocks for the Church of San Francesco Grande. Two versions of this work exist today. In one version, which is now in the Louvre Museum, Leonardo dared to be different by depicting the religious figures without halos. Also, the scenery in this work appears to have been painted from direct observation, in contrast to most artists of Leonardo's day who typically copied pictures of nature from books. The other version can be found in London's National Gallery. However, the figures have halos, and the surrounding rocks and plants look less realistic. For this reason, it is considered by some critics to be a collaborative work. In 1495, Leonardo was commissioned to decorate a wall of the dining hall in the monastery of Santa Maria delle Grazie. This masterpiece, known as The Last Supper, was an entirely new representation of a popular religious scene. In depicting the last meal that Jesus had with his disciples, Leonardo chose to portray the exact moment when Jesus announced that one of them would betray him. The disciples each respond in different ways to the announcement. Leonardo skillfully brought the scene to life by showing emotions like shock, fear, and anger through the diverse facial expressions and gestures of the disciples. An additional effect was achieved by the table and dishes that looked just like those used by the monks themselves. This would have created the impression that the figures in the painting and the monks were all eating together in the dining hall. As word spread of its brilliance, The Last Supper soon became the most celebrated painting of its time. Unfortunately, the work deteriorated rapidly because Leonardo had used experimental methods that were technically unsound. A traditional fresco is painted with a limited range of watercolors on fresh plaster, so that the artist must work quickly before the plaster dries. But Leonardo wanted to work slowly on The Last Supper. Therefore, he experimented with a new technique of painting with tempera on dry plaster. This was similar to painting on canvas or wood, and enabled him to work with a wider range of colors and add changes days or even years later. But by the early 1500s, the paint had started to come off the painting. There have been several attempts to restore the work over the centuries. The most recent restoration project took over 20 years and was completed in 1999. With the fall of Milan to the French in 1499, the Sforzas were forced out of the city, and Leonardo was left without a patron. After a brief period in Venice as a military architect and engineer, he returned to Florence, where he worked on various artistic commissions from 1500 to 1506. Among these was the Battle of Anghiari, a mural for the City Hall of Florence. Although this would have been the largest painting of Leonardo's career, like so many of his works, it was never completed. Leonardo abandoned the project after experiencing problems with the experimental materials and techniques that he had used. Then, in the mid-16th century, Giorgio Vasari was commissioned to paint over the unfinished mural in the City Hall. The Battle of Anghiari was therefore thought to have been destroyed. However, there is an alternative theory that Vasari, who could not bring himself to destroy such a masterpiece, built another wall to hide it behind his own work. In fact, there is an inscription in a corner of Vasari's mural that says, "Search and you shall find," in Italian. If the Battle of Anghiari still exists, we might be able to find it by using advanced technology to see through the walls of the City Hall. In preparation for the mural, Leonardo made numerous sketches and completed a full-size cartoon that was copied by other artists. Since both this cartoon and the mural itself were later lost, these copies and some of Leonardo's original sketches are all that we have of this work today. Even in its incomplete state, the Battle of Anghiari was considered to be among Leonardo's finest achievements. Commissioned to glorify a Florentine victory in war, it depicts the scene of a furious battle between two soldiers on horseback. According to Vasari, who saw the original mural, it would be impossible to express the inventiveness of Leonardo's design for the soldiers' uniforms, which he sketched in all their variety, or the crests of the helmets and other ornaments. not to mention the incredible skill demonstrated in the shape and features of the horses, which Leonardo, better than any other master, created with their boldness, muscles, and graceful beauty. Another work from Leonardo's later years in Florence is La Gioconda, more commonly known by its nickname, the Mona Lisa. This portrait is now perhaps the world's most famous painting, renowned for the mastery of its technique and the mysteriousness of its subject. The subject of the Mona Lisa is a lady wearing a plain dark dress with a scarf hanging from her left shoulder and a veil over her long hair. The simplicity of her dress emphasizes the delicate features of her face and hands. Behind her, there are realistic images of flowing rivers and rocky mountains. The scenery gradually becomes smaller and less detailed in the background, showing Leonardo's skillful use of aerial perspective. According to Vasari's description, in this work of Leonardo's, there was a smile so pleasing that it was a thing more divine than human to behold. This mysterious smile of the Mona Lisa is largely achieved through the use of sfumato, a technique that was developed by Leonardo. By means of sfumato, the subtle gradation of tone and color to soften outlines, Leonardo created a smoky, delicate effect around the lady's lips and eyes. This makes it difficult to tell whether she is actually smiling or not. Her expression seems to change constantly as you look at her, so she almost looks alive. The Mona Lisa influenced countless portraits after it, and occupies an important place in the history of art. In 1508, Leonardo settled in Milan. There he was involved in various engineering projects, and seems to have devoted much of his energy to scientific research. From 1513, Leonardo continued his studies under the patronage of Giuliano de' Medici in the Vatican. Following the death of his patron in 1516, Leonardo moved to France. For the last 3 years of his life, he lived near the royal palace of King François I, under the official title of first painter, architect, and engineer to the king. He spent most of his time organizing and editing his notebooks until his death on May 2, 1519. Leonardo started keeping a sketchbook in the early stages of his career, apparently with the aim of improving the quality of his artwork. He soon began using notebooks to document all his diverse interests. He would first make sketches or write notes on loose sheets of paper before arranging them in notebooks. As he wrote backward from right to left, the notes cannot be read unless you hold them up in front of a mirror. The reason why he used this mirror writing remains a mystery. Some people have suggested that Leonardo wanted to keep his notes private, while others have suggested that it was easier for him to write in reverse because he was left-handed. At any rate, the text is mainly used to explain the pictures, indicating Leonardo's preference for illustration over the written word. Leonardo left all his notebooks to his favorite assistant, Francesco Melzi. They are thought to have comprised thousands of pages. After Melzi's death, the notebooks were gradually divided up, scattered, and lost. They remained largely unknown until the 19th century. Over the years, 5,000 or more pages have been recovered and are now preserved in museums, galleries, and libraries around the world. The British Library has even made images of their collection, known as the Codex Arundel, accessible over the Internet. Leonardo's notebooks are often described as the first surviving notes of a scientist because they contain many characteristics of modern science, such as fieldwork, laboratories, instruments, and the application of mathematics to physical problems. Many of his insights anticipated scientific research by centuries. Leonardo's approach to science was far ahead of his time. He wrote that, although nature begins with the cause and ends with the experience, we must follow the opposite course, namely, begin with the experience and by means of it investigate the cause. Due to this belief in the importance of experience, Leonardo is said to have used the scientific method before it had even been invented. Four of the major themes among the amazing range that he covered were mechanics, anatomy, architecture, and painting. Leonardo had always been interested in understanding how machines worked, so that he could improve existing ones or invent his own. He was valued as an engineer in his day and often provided advice on technical matters. He produced a number of useful inventions, such as devices for drilling and lifting. Many of his more fanciful inventions were related to his fascination with birds and flight. Leonardo loved birds and would sometimes buy them at the market just so that he could set them free. He analyzed the structure of their wings and tried to copy their ability to fly. In Leonardo's view, the bird is an instrument functioning according to mathematical laws, and man has the power to reproduce an instrument like this with all its movements. He had many ideas for flying machines with wings that flapped up and down like those of a bird or bat. While his designs were truly innovative, they were not always practical. From an entry in his notebook, we know that Leonardo planned to fly a model of one machine that he had designed. Although there is no record of the actual experiment, the inventor did make a later note to himself that future experiments should be conducted over a lake in order to avoid injury. Few of Leonardo's inventions were constructed in his lifetime, but he sketched his ideas with such remarkable clarity that others have been able to build models of them centuries later. Such models can frequently be found on display alongside his notebooks. In June 2000, for example, a man called Adrian Nicholas tested a parachute built from illustrations and explanations in one of Leonardo's notebooks. It was a huge pyramid-shaped device made of canvas and wooden poles, weighing about 90 kilograms altogether. In Leonardo's day, tests would only have been possible from a tower, cliff, or tree. Nicholas, however, tried it from a hot air balloon at a height of 3,000 meters. He reported that the ride was very smooth, even though he did use a modern parachute for the last 600 meters, because he feared that Leonardo's parachute was too heavy for a safe landing. The study of anatomy is another dominant theme in the notebooks. Leonardo was interested in both the structure and function of the human body. He recorded his observations in his notebooks by devoting one or more pages to a particular body part and illustrating it from different perspectives. His detailed anatomical drawings would have been quite revolutionary in his day, when doctors still relied heavily upon textbooks and tradition. Even today, they are seen as the basis of modern scientific illustration. There is one particularly famous drawing in Leonardo's notebooks that brings together his study of proportion in art, anatomy, and architecture. Known as the Vitruvian Man, it depicts a man whose arms and legs are spread out to touch the circumference of a circle and the edges of a square. The accompanying text paraphrases the ideas of Vitruvius, a Roman architect in the 1st century BC, who believed that a temple should reflect the perfect proportions of the human body. Although Leonardo was not the first person to illustrate Vitruvian theory, he was possibly the first to do so by drawing a figure that adopts two different positions within the same image. Leonardo also wrote at length on the science of painting, and may have been intending to publish his work. He never did so in his lifetime, but some of his writings were published in 1651 under the title A Treatise on Painting. Leonardo considered art to be the depiction of natural effects through an understanding of their causes. In his view, scientific rules were essential in art for depicting the proportions and movements of the human figure, aerial and linear perspectives, or the effects of light and shadow. Both science and art were ways of exploring and understanding the world around him. Leonardo da Vinci is often regarded as a symbol of the High Renaissance, a period that reached new heights of artistic and scientific achievement. Less than 20 paintings can definitely be attributed to him, but they have influenced generations of artists after his death. With ongoing research into the notes and sketches in his notebooks, we are gaining more and more insight into one of history's most celebrated minds. Both his paintings and his notebooks are a precious legacy that will certainly continue to fascinate and inspire people all over the world for centuries to come.